A night of confrontation. The room was alive with an electrifying energy, the kind that made every breath feel heavier. People packed into the grand auditorium, their voices a rising tide of murmurs and anticipation. Rachel Evans, the firebrand socialist speaker, was about to take the stage. Known for her relentless critique of capitalism and privilege, she had gained a reputation for her unapologetic speeches that often ignited both admiration and outrage. Tonight, she had set her sights on the Trump family, a name synonymous with wealth, power, and controversy. As the spotlight illuminated Rachel, she strode to the podium with confidence, her eyes scanning the sea of faces before her. Her opening words were sharp, aimed directly at the legacy of the Trump family. "Privilege without accountability breeds corruption," she began, her voice strong and unyielding. "The walls they build are not just physical. They're barriers of greed, indifference, and entitlement." The audience erupted into a mixture of cheers and boos. The energy in the room surged with every word, the air charged with both support and dissent. In the back of the crowd, sitting in the shadows, a tall figure remained still. Barron Trump, now 18, had slipped in unnoticed, his face partially obscured by a baseball cap. Rarely seen in public, Barron had spent much of his life in the background, a quiet observer of the storm that surrounded his family. But tonight, something within him stirred. Rachel's words, sharp and unrelenting, pierced through the barriers he had built over the years. Each accusation felt personal, not just an attack on his family, but an assault on his very identity. The laughter and applause from the crowd only deepened the ache in his chest. As Rachel's speech reached its crescendo, Barron's hands clenched tightly. He could feel his heart pounding, a mixture of anger and vulnerability rising to the surface. Before he could stop himself, he stood up. The sudden movement caught the attention of those nearby. Gasps rippled through the room as his baseball cap fell, revealing his face. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Rachel paused mid-sentence, her confident demeanor faltering as the realization spread across the crowd. Barron Trump was in the audience. Barron's security detail moved quickly, but he raised a hand, signaling them to stay back. His towering frame and calm yet determined expression commanded attention as he stepped forward. The room, once filled with noise, fell into an uneasy silence. Even Rachel, known for her sharp wit and composure, appeared momentarily unsure. "May I say something?" Barron's voice cut through the quiet, steady yet tinged with emotion. Rachel hesitated, then extended the microphone to him. The crowd watched in stunned silence as he ascended the stage. For a brief moment, their eyes met, hers filled with curiosity, his with a raw intensity that hinted at the weight he carried. Taking the microphone, Barron turned to face the crowd. He stood tall, his shoulders squared, yet there was a vulnerability in his gaze that softened his imposing presence. "I've spent my entire life being judged for my last name," he began, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. "Tonight, I need to speak for myself, not as a Trump, but as a person." The audience leaned in, their expressions a mix of skepticism and intrigue. Cameras captured every angle, ensuring his words would echo far beyond this room. "You accuse my family of greed and corruption," he continued, his voice gaining strength. "But have you ever considered what it's like to grow up under a shadow so large it feels suffocating? To hear strangers speak about you as if they know your heart, as if your name alone defines your worth." The room grew impossibly quiet. Even Rachel, who had built her career on fiery rhetoric, seemed moved. Barron's voice cracked slightly as he spoke, but he pushed on, his emotions raw and unfiltered. "You talk about walls," he said, his gaze sweeping across the crowd. "Yes, my family has built them, but I've also seen them build bridges, quietly and without cameras. I've seen them help people in ways that never make headlines. We're not perfect, but does that mean we don't feel pain? That we don't deserve to be heard?" His words hung in the air, heavy with a sincerity that was impossible to ignore. Tears welled in his eyes, and he paused, taking a deep breath to steady himself. You don't have to like us, he concluded, his voice softer now, almost pleading. But please, don't dehumanize us. We're more than the headlines, more than the labels you assign to us. We're people, just like you. The silence that followed was deafening. For a moment, it seemed as though the entire room held its breath. Then, a single clap broke the stillness, followed by another and another. Soon, the room was filled with applause, though not everyone joined in. Some faces remained skeptical, their expressions unreadable. Rachel, standing a few steps away, seemed conflicted. For the first time in her career, she was unsure of how to respond. Handing Barron the microphone had been an impulsive decision, but now she wondered if it had been the right one. As Barron stepped down from the stage, the applause continued, though it was punctuated by murmurs of dissent. His security detail quickly surrounded him, guiding him toward the exit. But as he glanced back at the crowd, he saw something unexpected. A young boy in the front row, wiping tears from his eyes. In that moment, Barron realized his words had touched at least one person. And for him, that was enough. The aftermath of courage. The video of Barron's speech spread like wildfire, dominating headlines and social media within hours. Clips of his emotional plea were shared and reshared, sparking debates across the globe. Late-night talk shows, morning news programs, and political pundits all dissected the moment from every angle. Barron speaks, and hashtag Judge Emma Fairly trended online, with opinions split sharply down the middle. Some praised Barron's bravery, calling him a voice of unexpected compassion in a world often divided by hatred and misunderstanding. Others, however, accused him of playing the victim, claiming his wealth and privilege shielded him from real struggles. For Barron, the whirlwind of attention was overwhelming. Back at his family's estate, he retreated to his room, seeking solace in the quiet. The applause, the criticism, the flashing cameras, it all felt surreal. He had spoken from his heart, but the reaction had taken on a life of its own, far beyond anything he had anticipated. The quiet after the storm. Melania found him sitting by the window, staring out at the sprawling gardens. The late afternoon sunlight cast long shadows across the room, illuminating the worry etched on his face. She approached him gently, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You did something brave tonight," she said softly. Barron didn't respond immediately. His mind was a swirl of conflicting emotions, pride, doubt, exhaustion. Finally, he turned to her, his voice barely above a whisper. "Did I make it worse? Did I make us a bigger target?" Melania knelt beside him, her usually composed demeanor giving way to maternal vulnerability. "You made people listen," she said. "That's more than most ever achieve." Donald Trump, usually larger than life, had remained uncharacteristically quiet throughout the evening. When he finally watched the video of his son's speech, his expression was inscrutable. Later, he found Barron in the study, holding the handwritten note from the young boy who had been inspired by his words. "You did well," his father said, his tone measured but sincere. It was a simple statement, yet it carried a weight that Barron hadn't expected. Coming from his father, those 3 words meant more than he could express. The ripple effect. In the days that followed, Barron's speech became more than a viral moment. It became a movement. Stories poured in from people across the country who resonated with his plea for understanding. A girl from Kansas shared how her family's financial struggles had made her a target for ridicule. A boy in New York recounted being bullied because of his immigrant heritage. Each story carried a piece of the pain Barron had tried to convey. He spent hours reading through these messages, feeling their weight. He realized that his words had touched something deeper, something universal. It wasn't just about the Trump name. It was about all the invisible scars people carried from being judged unfairly. But with the praise came criticism, and the backlash was relentless. Satirical memes mocked his speech, portraying him as an out-of-touch elitist. Political commentators questioned his motives, accusing him of attempting to rehabilitate his family's image. The scrutiny felt suffocating, and for a moment, Barron considered retreating entirely, letting the moment fade into the background. It was Melania who gave him the clarity he needed. "You've opened a door," she reminded him one evening as they walked through the garden. "But what you do with it is what will define you. This isn't just about our family anymore." The threat in the shadows. As Barron began to consider his next steps, an unsettling development occurred. Late one night, his phone buzzed with an anonymous message. "Be careful. Not everyone wants to hear your voice." The words were vague but carried a chilling undertone. When he showed the message to his head of security, the response was immediate. Protocols were tightened, guards were stationed at every entrance, and Barron was advised to limit his public appearances. Despite the precautions, Barron refused to be silenced. "If I let fear control me, then the voices of those I spoke for will be lost," he told his mother. Still, the threat lingered in the back of his mind, a constant reminder of the risks that came with stepping into the public eye. The next chapter. Barron knew his next move had to be deliberate. This wasn't just about responding to critics or defending his family. It was about amplifying the stories of those who had reached out to him. He decided to host an event, a platform for people from all walks of life to share their experiences of being judged, misunderstood, or dismissed. The announcement of the event sparked another media frenzy. Supporters hailed it as a noble effort, while detractors dismissed it as a publicity stunt. Barron ignored the noise and focused on the logistics, working closely with a team to ensure the event would be safe and impactful. The day of the event arrived, and the venue was packed to capacity. The atmosphere was electric, a mix of hope and tension. Outside, protesters and supporters clashed, their chants echoing through the streets. Inside, a palpable sense of anticipation filled the air. Barron stepped onto the stage, his heart pounding as cameras flashed, capturing every movement. He took a deep breath and began, his voice steady and clear. "I'm not here to change anyone's mind about my family," he said. "I'm here because too many people feel unheard, unseen, and unloved. This isn't about politics, it's about humanity. It's about choosing kindness over judgment." The audience listened intently, some nodding in agreement, others remaining skeptical. As Barron spoke, he noticed a figure in the crowd, a man in a hooded sweatshirt, moving closer. The man's face was obscured, but his movements were deliberate, drawing the attention of Barron's security detail. The room grew tense as the man reached into his pocket. In an instant, the guards sprang into action, tackling him to the ground. The crowd erupted in screams, the atmosphere turning chaotic. Barron froze, his mind racing as the scene unfolded before him. The spark of resilience. Chaos erupted in the auditorium as security pinned the hooded man to the ground. Screams and gasps filled the air, blending with the clatter of chairs and the shouts of protesters outside. Barron stood frozen on stage, his heart pounding so loudly he could hardly think. For a moment, the world seemed to move in slow motion, security rushing in, the man resisting, and the audience caught between fear and confusion. "Stay back," one of the guards shouted, his voice firm but steady as he restrained the man. Barron's instinct told him to step forward, to help somehow, but a hand on his shoulder held him firmly in place. It was his chief of security, his face tense but controlled. "We've got this, sir. Don't move." The hooded man was swiftly escorted out, and the room slowly began to calm, though a lingering tension hung thick in the air. Barron swallowed hard, his eyes scanning the crowd. Some people looked shaken, others were murmuring among themselves, but all eyes were fixed on him. This moment, though terrifying, had become another defining chapter in his story, and he knew he couldn't let it end in silence. He took a deep breath, gripping the edges of the podium until his knuckles turned white. His voice, shaky but determined, broke through the murmurs. "I'm sorry for the disruption," he began, his words carrying over the uneasy crowd. "But if this says anything, it's that speaking up is never easy. It takes courage, and it comes with risks. Tonight, I'm reminded why this matters. The crowd quieted again, their attention drawn back to him. Barron took another moment to gather his thoughts, then continued. For too long, we've let fear and anger divide us. We've built walls, yes, sometimes literally, but also emotionally. We've stopped listening to one another. And when someone tries to break through those walls, the response is often to silence them. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. But silence isn't the answer. It never has been. Every story matters, even if it's hard to hear, even if it challenges us. Turning fear into action. The crowd's reaction was mixed but subdued, with pockets of applause rippling through the room. Barron stepped down from the stage as his team ushered him backstage. His hands were still trembling, adrenaline coursing through him. Backstage, Melania was waiting, her face pale but composed. She pulled him into a tight embrace. "I thought I was going to lose you out there," she whispered, her voice breaking slightly. "You won't," Barron said, his voice steadier now. "I'm not giving up." Meanwhile, the hooded man was quickly identified. To everyone's surprise, he wasn't an assailant. He was an unemployed father of two who had attended the event to deliver a letter to Barron. His behavior, though suspicious, was driven by desperation, not malice. The letter was a plea for help, detailing how he had been ostracized in his community due to political differences. The incident was a sobering reminder of the very divisions Barron had spoken about. Barron insisted on reading the letter personally. The man's story struck a chord with him, reigniting his determination to use his voice not just for himself, but for others who felt unheard. He reached out to the man privately, offering support and resources to help him rebuild his life. This act, though quiet, symbolized the bridge Barron had been striving to create. The movement grows. The incident only added fuel to the media frenzy. News outlets latched onto the narrative, with headlines ranging from "Barron Trump's message of unity interrupted by scare" to "Is Barron Trump America's newest symbol of privilege?" The polarized reactions were impossible to ignore. Some viewed Barron as a symbol of hope and resilience, while others continued to label him as a product of privilege, incapable of understanding real hardship. But amidst the noise, something remarkable was happening. A movement was taking shape. Judging Fairly evolved into a broader campaign. Stories poured in from people across the political and social spectrum, sharing experiences of being misjudged or silenced. High school students created video compilations of their struggles, teachers organized discussions on empathy, and activists from all walks of life began to unite under the shared belief that every voice deserved to be heard. Barron, still processing the weight of his new role, watched the movement grow with a mix of awe and responsibility. He knew this was bigger than him now. It was a platform for change, and he couldn't let it falter. A bold step forward. Barron decided to host another event, this time with a clearer purpose. Instead of focusing on himself or his family, he wanted to spotlight others. The event, titled Voices United, would feature speakers from all walks of life, sharing their stories of resilience and hope. The planning was meticulous, with input from community leaders, educators, and activists. Barron worked tirelessly, often late into the night, reviewing every detail to ensure the event would be impactful and inclusive. As the day approached, the stakes felt higher than ever. Protesters and supporters alike were expected to turn out in droves, and the security measures were unprecedented. But Barron was undeterred. "This isn't about me anymore," he told his team. "It's about creating a space where people can finally be heard." The night that changed everything. The venue was filled to capacity, the air buzzing with anticipation. Barron stepped onto the stage, the weight of the moment pressing on him, but also fueling his resolve. He looked out at the crowd, a sea of faces, each with their own stories, their own pain, their own hope. "This stage isn't mine," he began, his voice steady and clear. "It belongs to all of you. Tonight, we're here to listen, to learn, and to heal." One by one, speakers took the stage. A single mother who had been shamed for seeking assistance, a young man who had faced discrimination for his beliefs, a veteran struggling to reintegrate into society. Each story was raw, unfiltered, and deeply human. The audience listened with rapt attention, their expressions shifting from tears to applause and back again. Barron sat in the front row, his heart swelling with pride and humility. For the first time in his life, he felt like he was part of something bigger than himself, a movement rooted not in division, but in connection. As the final speaker left the stage, Barron returned to the podium for the closing remarks. His voice was filled with emotion as he said, "Tonight, we proved something important, that no matter how different we may seem, our stories have the power to bring us together. Let's not stop here. Let's keep listening, keep learning, and keep building bridges." A legacy of unity. The event was hailed as a turning point, a rare moment of unity in a divided world. Barron continued his work, using his platform to amplify the voices of others and inspire meaningful conversations. The road wasn't easy, criticism and challenges remained, but he had found his purpose. In the months that followed, Barron's message resonated far beyond the auditorium. Schools adopted empathy-focused curricula inspired by the event. Community centers hosted story-sharing nights, and the Voices United initiative became a national movement. For Barron, it was never about erasing the divisions that existed. It was about showing that even in a world of walls, bridges could still be built. And that, he realized, was the legacy worth leaving. A lesson for all. Months after the Voices United event, Barron sat alone in a quiet corner of his family's estate, reflecting on how much his life had changed. The whirlwind of attention, the backlash, and the overwhelming support had all shaped him in ways he hadn't anticipated. He was no longer just a name tied to a legacy. He had found his voice, and more importantly, his purpose. The Voices United movement had taken on a life of its own, far beyond what Barron could have imagined. Community centers in small towns and big cities alike began hosting empathy workshops and story-sharing circles. Social media, which had once been a battleground of division, empathy first, and build bridges. People from opposing sides of politics and life circumstances started engaging in genuine conversations, even if just to listen. For Barron, the greatest reward wasn't the recognition or the media attention. It was the letters and messages he continued to receive. A teenager from Texas thanked him for giving her the courage to confront her bullies. A man in Michigan wrote about how he and his estranged brother reconnected after years of silence. The stories poured in, each one a testament to the power of empathy and understanding. One day, Barron received a letter from Rachel Evans, the speaker who had initially inspired him to stand up and speak out. Her tone was candid, her words raw. "I didn't expect you to challenge me that night," she wrote, "and I certainly didn't expect you to move me. But you did. You reminded me that passion without compassion can only take us so far. Thank you for that lesson." Barron folded the letter carefully and placed it in a box where he kept the notes that mattered most. Rachel's words were a reminder of the lesson he himself had learned. That change starts not with shouting louder, but with listening harder. The legacy of a single voice. As Barron reflected, he realized that the true lesson of his journey wasn't about him or his family's name. It was about humanity. People judged each other too quickly, spoke too harshly, and forgot too often that behind every name, every face, every label, there was a person with a story. The journey had taught him, and countless others, that everyone carries invisible burdens. Wealth, fame, or even privilege didn't exempt anyone from pain or misunderstanding. And while it was easy to criticize from a distance, the harder and more meaningful path was to choose kindness. A message for the world. In his final public statement before stepping back from the spotlight, Barron left the world with a message that encapsulated everything he had learned. We live in a world that is loud with opinions but quiet in understanding. It's easy to judge, easy to dismiss, easy to hate. But what's hard, and what's worth it, is to stop and listen. to hear the pain, the hope, and the humanity in someone's story. We may not always agree, and that's okay. But if we can find it in our hearts to judge less and understand more, we can build a world that isn't divided by walls but connected by bridges. A world where everyone, no matter their name or their past, is given the chance to be seen for who they truly are. The lasting lesson. Barron's words resonated deeply, and though he chose to step away from the public eye, his impact endured. The movement he sparked continued to grow, carried forward by countless voices inspired by his courage and authenticity. His story became a reminder for all of us that one voice, no matter how small or unexpected, can spark change. That kindness costs nothing but can mean everything. And that in a world that often feels divided, listening is the first step toward unity. As the years passed, Barron remained a quiet figure, living a life of purpose and humility. But his story lived on, teaching generations that while we may not be able to control how others judge us, we can always choose how we judge others. And in that choice lies the power to change the world.